I'm here with Dallas Trinity captain Amber Brooks. Amber was the very first signing for the USL Women's Super League club, Dallas Trinity FC, and she has led this team to a playoff berth in the league's inaugural season. Playoffs start this weekend with Dallas taking on Tampa Bay in the semifinals. Amber, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to chat, Amber. You and I go way back. We played, I think, in a U17 and a U20 World Cup together.
We did, yep.
That was a long time ago. And I'm so curious to learn more about your journey and your season with Dallas this year. Obviously, you played in the NWSL for a long time. You had long stints at the Houston Dash and the Seattle Reign, and you last played in the NWSL for the Washington Spirit in 2023. I want to go right back there. You're entering the offseason after the 2023 NWSL season as a free agent. What was going through your mind as a player?
Well, as I approached free agency, I knew that, I wasn't going to remain with the Spirit. I had a very good relationship, still do, with Mark Krikorian. And, he was just very honest, like, hey, like, you had, a limited role this year. It's probably even more likely to be more limited next year. And that's probably not, what you want for your career. And I was actually pretty excited about free agency in the sense that I knew Utah and Bay were coming in. And even he was like, hey, like, you'd be a perfect pickup for like an expansion side if I'm building a team as GM there. And I really wanted to go to Utah, which maybe sounds a little weird, but my sister-in-law and brother-in-law live there. We spent quite a bit of time there and just love the area. So I was actually pretty intrigued by it. I bring, leadership experience. Like, I'm not a, high profile player, I'm not going to break the bank. But they were pretty adamant from the beginning, like, hey, like, we're not interested. I was like, oh, that was obviously disappointing to hear. So I approached that last game with a Spirit, kind of thinking, hey, like, this could be my last like NWSL game. And, going into the off season, had to leave team housing. I went back. Jay and I lived with my mom for a little bit in North Carolina. I went into preseason a bit with Chicago. But again, I think I was at the point where I wasn't going to just settle for any team, any contract. Like, I'd already played 10 years. I knew what I was capable of, what I was deserving of, and it needed to fit. It needed to make sense in the short term and the long term for what my goals were, both personally and, on and off the field. So, again, that didn't work out with Chicago. No hard feelings. So then at that point, I was training with UNC on a consistent basis in that spring, which was really a blessing to be back around Anson and in that environment that I love so much. But I honestly contemplated, retiring and moving into, I want to be a GM in the future. So I honestly started reaching out, and I actually reached out to Trip Neal, one of, the main owners of our team. And I was like, hey, like, do you have a GM? Like, I didn't even ask about playing.
Oh my God, wow.
Yeah. And he was like, I reached out on LinkedIn. He's like, we're in the final stages of hiring our GM. It's Chris Petroselli, actually. And he wants to know, like, do you want to play? And I was like, you know what? Like, yeah, like I am still interested in playing, but again, I wasn't going to play like just for the sake of playing. It had to make sense and check a lot of boxes. So I went in with a lot of trust, knowing that as much as it's like a brand new league and there's going to be growing pains, I knew that player safety was going to be, a priority, and that, based on some of the not so great experiences I've had, I wasn't worried about that. But I went in very open-minded, very much like, here we go, like it's almost like starting all over.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been great.
That's so amazing to hear. I love that you actually reached out about a GM position and then they convinced you to play. What about, coming to Dallas, and what about when they did kind of say, do you want to play, made this league, but specifically this team, feel like the right place for you?
I mean, the Neal family honestly really sold me. So they're all involved, from Jim and Jean, the parents, on down, all four children that are, between 40 and 28. They're all involved, all their spouses. Obviously, you've known me enough. I'm pretty big on family, and I just loved like their commitment to the project. And I love their mentality. Like, they have such a winning mentality. They're a bit old school in that way. And obviously, they're in the business of making money, but I think they acknowledged, like, hey, like, we set out every day to win, and if you guys win, we'll put butts in the seats. So I really like that mentality. And I feel like, again, as someone toward the end of their career, like, my main goal is to win championships. So I wanted owners that were serious about putting together a good team to win championships. And then, yeah, I think, some people don't love Texas, but for me, my fiance coaches high school football. That was going to be a great step for him in the right direction.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just had enough experience living in Houston a bit. So yeah, we were just kind of all on board really with taking a step toward not just my career, but even life after soccer. And, the club was willing to, I have kind of a assistant to the GM type title a little bit. I, do a little side work with Chris, just kind of mentoring and just following him, learning the ins and outs. And I think it's really cool. Obviously, the USL is franchise versus single entity, so it's very different than the NBSL in that respect. And they kind of teach their own as far as ownership goes. So yeah, it's just been a really great all around on the field, but then off the field, I feel like I'm taking tangible steps towards what's next.
Yeah, it sounds like such a perfect fit for you in more ways than one, and I think what I'm really interested in is kind of that idea. I mean, you mentioned that you considered retiring, and then this opportunity to play kind of came up, and I'm wondering from your perspective how playing in this league and having this opportunity to also learn what being a GM might be like alongside, how do you think about that in terms of, this playing opportunity? How are you balancing that? Is that something that you feel this league and this team and this opportunity popped up at the right time in your career? Can you just talk to us a little bit more about that?
I think so for sure. Like again, I'm a player first, and everyone in the ownership, Chris, like everyone agrees. Like my main job is to show up and perform, and so they've been great in terms of like the work that I can do. Learning the off-field stuff is it's on my own time, and it can't cut into my recovery time or my preparation time. And yeah, I think it was great to be like embraced by an ownership group that I think in the past I've known for quite a while that this is the next step I'd like to take, but I didn't always feel comfortable voicing that because, you don't want your GM or the owners or people thinking like, oh,
She's
you're
not
already
taking it
thinking about
seriously.
retirement. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so they were like, hey, like, we'd love you to play as many years as you want to keep playing. But we acknowledge that there is life after soccer and you have so many great connections and experiences. And for them, they're like, we can benefit from your knowledge and your experiences now. And then, potentially could I, when I retire here, like, move into a front office role with this club, and I've played,
Yeah.
and so I know the ethos, and I know the values, and it's not like just starting over. So
Yeah.
it's great to have that. Like, I didn't feel like it was going to be used against me. It was just
Right.
like, hey, like, we understand, like, you can't go back and change your age and everything else. Like, we embrace that and want to work with you, but obviously maximize what you've got left to give on the field.
Right. Yeah, that resonates with me a lot because I started doing a podcast when I was still playing, and I had that similar feeling of like, "Oh, is this going to be viewed as like I'm not focused on soccer?" But in hindsight, when I had to retire early due to injury, I was like, "Thank God I have some reps and some experience doing something else that I really love." Otherwise, I would be jumping into this whole new world totally blind with no connections, with no network. And instead, I on the same day that I retired, I had a full-time job doing this. So I always recommend to players who are, whatever age they're at, that it's smart to think about what's next while you're still playing. I think I'm also curious, Amber, when you were going through this transition, what was your understanding of the Super League as a league? So originally, the Super League was pursuing a tier two status, but it changed to tier one, which is the same as the NWSL. And I do think, from a fan perspective, even for me, there was some confusion about what made this league different and what does this mean for the whole women's soccer landscape in our country. So when you were introduced to the concept of this league, what did you think of it? And how has it, either like exceeded or met your expectations?
Well, I was probably one of the first like players to have knowledge of it. Again, I was actually in preseason with the Spirit. We were down at IMG. You were actually, I think, there with Kansas City.
Yeah.
And Amanda Vanderpoort had just taken the job. She had just
Yeah.
left FIF Pro and taken the job. And I caught up, got lunch with her, and she started, hey, like, I'm here to be president of the Super League. At that point, they had thought they were launching in August 2023, and she's like, we're thinking about a fall to spring calendar, like lining up with the European calendar,
Yeah.
and having these different aspects, and kind of just like shooting ideas off of me and what I thought, because obviously I'd played in Germany that follows a similar calendar versus the NWSL and all this. And so I kind of was aware early on that like this league was in fact happening. It wasn't just talk. Like, they brought Amanda to be commissioner, like they're pretty serious.
Yeah.
But again, like I hadn't I didn't know much about the USL on the men's side even. So it was
Right.
very much like, okay, until it happens, who knows? Um, and then, yeah, again, like I had conversations with Amanda about, hey, like which clubs do you think, are best suited maybe for me and what I want to do and all that, in fall of 2023. And then obviously it got to the point where the spring where I was like, hey, like I'm pretty seriously talking to Dallas and a couple other teams, what do you think? And so, I think the intrigue about it is, there's enough differences, right, between the NWSL and the USL just from a matter of fact of how they're run, right? Like single entity versus franchise and, no salary cap and the length, the timing of the season. And then I think, when it got down to it, of course, I'm a competitor. We all are, right? You know, I heard those things like, oh, NWSL versus USL. And it's like, no one in our league, I promise you, is saying like we are better than the NWSL, and like we do things better and we have better play. Like, but at the end of the day, it's providing an environment for 200 plus female players to play professionally in the United States, and a lot of players who, especially the American ones who would have to go overseas or might just decide not to
Yeah.
play because they don't feel comfortable going overseas or they don't so that's the big framework that you have to
Yeah.
work from is at the end of the day, like the USL Super League is providing jobs for these
Yeah.
players that otherwise, aren't making NWSL rosters or maybe are, but aren't playing good minutes or having to go overseas and everything else. So at the end of the day, it's just opportunity, which is, really you look at how many great women's soccer players are on in the US. We're like so much talent, right?
Yeah.
And there's not enough team environments and professional environments for those players. So that at the end of the day is like, hey, everyone just has to be happy, that
Yeah.
there's now what 600 professional soccer players in the US between the NWSL and the USL.
Yeah, that was one of the things when I had an early conversation with Amanda Vandervoort. That was one of the things she pointed out to me. She was like, nobody is questioning if there are too many men's professional teams and leagues. She had an absurd number of men's professional teams in the US compared to only at the time was 12 or 14 NWSL teams. And I think that really opened my eyes to the idea like, yes, we should welcome this league. This is more opportunity, exactly what you're saying. And I think not only is it more opportunity for more players to play, but there's this now new unique opportunity for players to go out on loan and to go back and
Mm-hmm.
forth between leagues. We're seeing Seattle Reign midfielder Sam Meza, who I would think was on your team,
Mm-hmm.
have this
Yep.
great season for Seattle. And I think in part because she was able to go and play for Dallas, have this, gain a lot of confidence, gain a lot of minutes. Now she's coming back to Seattle. She's with the U23 national team. Your team right now has a few players on loan from the Washington Spirit.
Yep.
How do you think these leagues can, we can kind of change this narrative of being, which I too have been a part of saying, like, can we really support two leagues? Can these leagues actually support each other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think too, like if you look at the markets that USL teams are, besides Dallas and DC, like they're smaller markets, right?
Right.
And they're places where, again, like Charlotte, like you have to drive 3 hours to Raleigh, right? And there's still plenty, you're getting quite good attendance in Spokane, right? There would never be an NWSL team in Spokane, like the closest is Seattle. So I just think too, like there's plenty of markets out there. You see the interest in NWSL teams, right? Like teams are paying $100+ million, and there's probably 20 more cities that would love to have a team, and that's just not possible right now, right? So I think you look at it from that business perspective. And then, yeah, now there's NWSL 2 starting, which, remains to be seen, right? Exactly how that unfolds. But like you said, like, again, I don't think the USL Super League would ever, want to define itself as a feeder league to the NWSL. But in terms of, you've got older players like me who have had that experience and are at the end of the career and can kind of mentor those younger players. And then you've got players who are starting out that either wouldn't quite make a roster or wouldn't be getting those minutes. And they're getting now those valuable minutes. And I'm actually pretty intrigued to see, if there are a handful of players that this summer, make a jump from a USL Super League team to an NWSL team. And then, like you said, we've had quite a few loan players and all of them really have done great for us. And I think, again, if you ask them like, hey, would you rather be not rostering or sitting the bench, on an NWSL team or playing 90 minutes week in and week out with us,
Yeah.
for right now, like that's what they would choose. So again, I think they can work together, right? Again, there's so many female players and not enough
Yeah.
jobs out there for us, right? And
Yeah.
not enough playing time for everyone. So, I don't see, again, I don't think anyone will ever admit to like, hey, like we're a feeder system and whatnot. But, and I also think you look at the youth side of it, the
Yeah.
fact that we have like, one of our academy players, Celie Strawn, is hopefully going to win Young Player of the Year for her contributions, but she's set to enroll at UNC next January, and she will have played 20 plus games at the professional
Professional
level, scored.
games.
Yeah. And she otherwise, if she went the NWSL route, she, wouldn't be able to play collegiately. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool aspect. I know, like, for our academy players, all the time, I'm like, I'm so jealous. Like, I would have loved to have had this opportunity, right? Like, when we were in high school, like,
I know.
forget club, like, let's train with these pros, but still retain your college eligibility. And you know what? If after a semester, a year, whatever, it's not for you, you can then, make the jump. But I think that's a really cool facet of the Super League that is, unique to them and provides a different opportunity.
Definitely. Well, I do want to hear a little more specifically about your team. You guys came in third
Mm-hmm.
this season. You won 12 of your 28 regular season games. You clinched a playoff berth very excitingly in the last game of the season. You beat the first place team, the Carolina Ascent. I want to know how you would describe Dallas's season this year. Like coming into it, it's the first year of the league. What were some of the pivotal moments for your team throughout the year?
Actually, we got off to a pretty good start. And again, like, I think as players, we sat down and we had expectations and we, established values and goals for the season. But in terms of like the overall, like from ownership or just in general, like it was very much like, let's just see what we can do, like let's win, is it adamant that we wanted to make the Cotton Bowl our fortress. Like, we have to win our home games, right? Like everyone would probably say. And then let's pick up points on the road, where we can. But yeah, I think really, the fall was, I think we've been kind of an inconsistent team. We haven't been one of those teams that's gone on like a 7, 8 game unbeaten streak. We've won big, right? Like winning at home against Brooklyn 6-0 was big for us.
Yeah.
But then, we'll tie or lose the next game. And then obviously we're on a 3 game losing streak heading into this last one. And, really, I thought we had playoffs wrapped up like a month ago. And then, it's just like, oh, just one more win, we've got it. And like we ran out of games. And then we're like, great, like I'm glad it's a home game, but we're playing, the
The
first
number
place
one
team that
team.
clinched 3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
like, so we definitely made it harder on ourselves. We've had, quite a few injuries. And again, lone players, like as great as it's been, right? Like a couple of them left in the winter. We got a couple new ones, international call ups. So I think the big word that I would describe are, the season is inconsistent, but at the end of the day, better than anyone. Like, the goal is to get into playoffs, and then
Yeah.
it's a brand new
Anything can
game, right?
happen.
Anything can, yeah, exactly.
Totally. So, okay, so going into playoffs, obviously we know your game is coming up this weekend. What can we expect from your team?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just there's 4 teams in playoffs, so it's just the 2 semifinals and the final. What are you thinking going into this weekend?
I mean, to be honest, Saturday's game was, we called it like a cup final. Again, our
Yeah.
coaches are from Scotland, so that's what they refer to it as. So we already kind of feel like we won a playoff game, if you want to call that a quarterfinal, right? And so I think heading into the semi, obviously, we're on a high, and we've had very competitive games against pretty much every team, but specifically against Tampa. Like, they're a very physical team. It's tough to play on their turf surface. It just doesn't, promote a very beautiful passing game. So we know we're gonna have to go in there first of all with a willingness to fight and win the battle first of all. And then, again, I think we are, coming off of a win that gives us confidence. And we know what we're capable of on our good days, and we know what we can fall to when we don't show up. So I think hopefully playing and winning under pressure this past weekend, gives us a boost and an example. Hey, like, we can do this, but we have to go now do it. The next 2 games to win the championship. But yeah, I think again, it's anyone's game in playoffs. I think you throw out the past results that you've had against, we've played each team 4 times, like they're irrelevant. It's one game, 90 minutes. And, I think our coaches do a really good job with tactical adjustments here or there and little things that, help us pull out wins. And I think we have enough, we, Chi and Hannah and Allie
Yeah.
Thornton, like we've got some good experience where I don't think, it'll be too like in the limelight or too much for us. And yeah, we're definitely geared up for it for sure.
I am so glad that you were able to come on the show to talk to you about this. Like, I think throughout the USL season, I've been looking at rosters and recognizing that I have lots of friends and former teammates playing in the league. And I feel like having a player like you leading your team, honestly, kind of being involved with like step by step as the league goes through. The league, this league is still in its infancy. We were comparing it to the NWSL for a second, and kind of to your point, like this was year one, so there will be growing pains and it will go through some stuff. But I'm really glad that there are players like you involved. And just again, considering you and I both lived through a time where just the one professional league, we were worried year after year, would the NWSL be back? Would it be back the next year, or was it in danger of folding? I think it's really inspiring and like validating that now there are two leagues being sustained and that the audience wants more, the markets can sustain more. And so I think, Amber, my last question for you is, if you're just speaking to women's soccer fans in America, why is the USL Super League special and why should fans be watching?
Um, I think the Super League is special. Again, I think you look at the academy aspect of it and just the amount of younger players that have huge impacts on their teams. And I think, sometimes you fall victim to like, oh, these are the star players and kind of the usuals and you get stuck with versus I think our league, you watch games and like you said, it might be like, hey, like who is this player? And you look them up and, there's players from all across the world still, right? Like we have 7, 8 internationals on our team. A lot of teams do. And I think again, like if you look at it from the mindset of like these are players that otherwise, would not be playing in this country or potentially playing at all. So you're providing that opportunity and, that platform where, I'm sure if you asked a lot of my teammates, like, hey, like, do you want to go play in the NWSL one year? Do you want to go play overseas or something? Like most of them probably say yes. And so I think again, like instead of looking at it as competition, look at it as like, hey, we're side by side. We're providing women soccer players more opportunities to hone their game in this country. The best country for developing women soccer players and winning World Cups and all the great things you've done, right? And I think it'll be really cool. Like I wouldn't be shocked if there's some, younger players or academy players that either they go to college or they go right pro and they're helping the US women's national team
Yeah,
win, down the road. And it's like, hey, like you got started through the Super League, that it's not just always one path like we've seen, right? So
so true.
I think that's really, again, like what's special about the Super League is at the end of the day, like there's 200 more female athletes
Yeah.
that can make, pro soccer in the US, their profession and their livelihood.
I when you said there's not just one path, that really struck me because I even thinking about your career and all of the different and unique paths that you've been down and now taking this step towards doing what you're doing with Dallas Trinity, being a player, also learning something else, just broadening your own horizons in that way is super exciting. So, Amber, this was like honestly such an awesome interview and I know everybody's going to be really excited to hear it. So, thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate the invite for sure. Thank you.